I overheard my husband's father whisper to my husband, "Your wife? She doesn't deserve a cent. She's out of the family." I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled. That night I quietly shifted every dollar into the offshore account I'd prepared. What they never imagined was the power I truly held. I discovered my husband was planning to discard me at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, while transferring another $50,000 to my Zurich account. Mason's voice echoed from Clayton's home office as I passed through our penthouse hallway. "Your wife doesn't deserve a cent. She's out of the family." My laptop was open in the guest bathroom, multiple banking tabs active, documentation of every suspicious Blackwood transaction I'd collected saved to encrypted drives. I'd been moving money for 6 months. Not stealing, just protecting what was legally mine before they could steal it from me. Clayton's weak agreement with his father confirmed what I'd suspected. The Blackwoods thought I was sleeping peacefully down the hall. They had no idea I was already $3 million ahead of them. The guest bathroom had become my secret office over the past year. White marble, gold fixtures. A heated floor that Clayton never knew I'd figured out how to disable so the electrical usage wouldn't spike during my late-night sessions. I sat on the closed toilet lid, laptop balanced on my knees, fingers moving across the keyboard with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this countless times before. Another transfer initiated. Another $50,000 moving from the consulting account they'd set up in my name to keep their paperwork clean. Before we continue, if you've ever felt invisible in your own marriage or underestimated by those who should value you most, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps these important stories reach more women. Now let's see what Madison discovered next. 6 months earlier I'd been a different person. Still Madison Blackwood on paper, still playing the role of devoted wife, but something had shifted the day I found that first invoice. Clayton had left his briefcase open on our bed, rushing to make a golf date with his father. A normal wife would have closed it, put it in his study, maybe texted him about it. But I'd seen a number that didn't make sense. $300,000 for strategic consulting from a company I'd never heard of. When I Googled the address, it was a mail drop in Delaware. That was the thread that unraveled everything. One suspicious invoice led to another, then another. Shell companies layered on shell companies, all leading back to accounts controlled by Mason and Clayton. They'd been siphoning money from Blackwood Industries for years, hiding it behind my name on half the documentation because who would suspect the innocent wife who still shopped sales at Target despite living in a $15 million penthouse? The beautiful part was that they'd been so arrogant about it. Every consulting contract in my name, every gift from Mason for being part of the family, every bonus Clayton had generously allocated to my personal account, all of it was legally mine. They'd created the paper trail themselves, never imagining I'd be smart enough to understand what I was looking at, much less bold enough to act on it. "The prenup makes it clean," Clayton was saying now, his voice carrying through the walls. "She gets nothing from the family trusts." I almost laughed, covering my mouth with my free hand while initiating another transfer with the other. The prenup. That precious document they'd pressured me to sign without my own lawyer present, promising it was just a formality, and that it would never matter anyway. They were right about one thing. It did specify I'd get nothing from the Blackwood family trusts. But it said nothing about the consulting fees. Nothing about the gifts. Nothing about the income from shell companies they'd registered in my name. My phone buzzed. Another confirmation from Singapore. The account there now held $800,000. Small enough not to trigger immediate alerts, large enough to matter. I had accounts spread across 14 countries, each carefully structured to stay below reporting thresholds. It had taken me 4 months just to research the banking laws, another 2 to set everything up. YouTube University, I'd called it in my head, watching video after video about international finance, taking notes in a notebook I kept hidden in a tampon box. The one place Clayton would never look. "When should we tell her?" Clayton asked his father. "After the Fisher merger closes," Mason replied. "We need her signature on the joint tax returns first. Then we can dispose of her properly." Dispose. Like I was expired milk or last season's fashion. I typed faster, pulling up the joint investment account Clayton didn't know I had access to. He'd given me the password himself 3 years ago when he'd had surgery and needed me to check on a transaction. He'd changed his personal password since then but forgot about this one. Rich people always forget the details they consider beneath them. The account held $2.3 million. I'd been skimming from it for months, small amounts that looked like automatic deductions or fee adjustments. Tonight I took half. By morning, when the banks opened and someone might notice, the money would have bounced through 4 different countries and landed safely in accounts they'd never find. My mother had warned me about this life. Standing in her kitchen in Queens the day before my wedding, she'd held my face in her hands and said, "Madison, baby, always have your own money. Love is wonderful, but love doesn't pay rent when a man decides he's done with you." I'd laughed at her then, shown her the 8-carat diamond Clayton had given me, told her things were different now. But here I was 7 years later, sitting in a guest bathroom at midnight, grateful for her wisdom and my own paranoid preparation. The Blackwoods had given me an education they never intended. Every boring business dinner where Mason bragged about his offshore strategies, every document Clayton carelessly left open on his computer, every conversation they had in front of me like I was furniture. All of it had taught me exactly how to beat them at their own game. "I'll have Thompson draft the papers," Mason was saying. "We'll claim irreconcilable differences. Make it seem mutual. The last thing we need is her going vindictive on us." Too late for that, Mason. Way too late. I closed one laptop and opened another. My backup, purchased with cash, never connected to our home network. This one held the real treasures. Not just bank records but emails, recordings, photos of documents that proved Mason had been stealing from his own company for over a decade. Evidence that would interest not just divorce lawyers but federal prosecutors. They thought they were planning my execution. Instead, they were attending their own funeral, and they didn't even know they were already dead. By the time they discovered what I'd done, I'd be gone, along with everything I could legally claim and quite a bit they'd never prove I'd taken. The clock on my phone showed 12:23 a.m. In 8 hours, Clayton would wake up, kiss me goodbye and leave for the office, never knowing that his wife had just declared war. Mason would review the merger documents, confident in his plan to discard me. And I would continue playing the perfect wife, arranging flowers, planning dinners, smiling at all the right moments. The next morning arrived like any other lie we'd been living. Clayton's alarm went off at 6:30, and I felt him shift beside me, stretching with that satisfied groan of someone who'd slept the sleep of the guiltless. My eyes stayed closed, breathing regulated, playing the part of the peacefully sleeping wife while my mind raced through the transfers I'd completed just hours before. $3.2 million, scattered across the globe like seeds that would grow into my new life. "Morning, beautiful," Clayton murmured, kissing my shoulder. The same shoulder he'd agreed to strip of everything just 8 hours earlier. I made a sleepy sound, turned toward him with a drowsy smile that had taken years to perfect. He was already heading to the shower, whistling off-key, probably thinking about the merger, about the money, about anything except the woman he'd married. I waited until I heard the water running before I got up. My reflection in the bedroom mirror showed nothing of last night's revelations. Same face, same body, same woman who'd stood before this mirror in a wedding dress 7 years ago, believing in forever. But now I saw what had always been there. The slight hollow under my eyes from years of pretending not to notice, the tension in my jaw from biting backwards, the careful posture of someone always performing for an audience that was never going to applaud. The family dinner at Mason's estate had ended at 10, later than usual because Victoria had wanted to discuss her new charity committee position. Another tax write-off disguised as philanthropy. I'd sat through 3 hours of subtle insults wrapped in compliments, watching Victoria and Clayton exchange those looks whenever I spoke, feeling Susan's eyes evaluate everything from my posture to my pronunciation of certain words. They'd been particularly vicious last night, probably excited about their plan, unable to resist taking extra shots at the woman they were about to discard. "Madison, dear," Victoria had said over dessert, "you must give me the name of your colorist. It's so brave of you to go with something so bold." My hair was its natural auburn, untouched by chemicals, but Victoria knew that. She also knew that implying I colored it was her way of suggesting I was trying too hard, reaching above my station. I'd smiled, thanked her, even pretended to write down the name of a salon I'd never visited. That was always my role at these dinners, grateful recipient of wisdom from my betters. Clayton had squeezed my knee under the table and I'd thought it was support. Now I realized it was a warning to keep playing along. The drive home had been silent except for Clayton scrolling through his phone, occasionally showing me things I was supposed to find interesting. A new restaurant opening. Some gossip about a colleague's divorce. Normal Tuesday night conversation for a normal Tuesday night couple, except we'd never been normal, had we? I'd just been too desperate to believe in the fairy tale to see the prison bars. I heard the shower turn off and quickly busied myself with selecting Clayton's tie for the day. The blue Hermes with the subtle pattern, the one that brought out his eyes. The same eyes that had looked at me with such sincerity when he'd promised to love and cherish me. I laid it on the bed next to his pressed shirt, the perfect wife still performing her perfect duties. "You're up early," Clayton said, emerging from the bathroom with a towel around his waist, his chest still damp. He'd kept himself in good shape, I'd give him that. Probably for whoever he was seeing on those late nights at the office. "Couldn't sleep," I said, which was true enough. "Thought I'd make you breakfast before your big day. The Fisher meeting is this morning, right?" His eyes sharpened slightly. "How did you know about that?" "You mentioned it last week," I lied smoothly. I'd seen it on his calendar when he'd left his laptop open, right next to emails about transitioning Madison out of the picture post-merger. "Right, of course." He relaxed, started getting dressed. "Actually, skip breakfast. I'll grab something at the office. Dad wants to prep before the meeting." Dad. He still called Mason Dad, like he was 12 years old seeking approval. After 7 years of marriage, I'd never graduated beyond Madison with Mason. Never daughter, or even dear. Just Madison, said with the same tone you'd use for the help. I went to the kitchen anyway, needed the routine to keep my hands steady. The penthouse stretched out around me, all glass and marble and carefully curated art that I'd had no say in selecting. The kitchen alone was bigger than my entire Queens apartment had been. Sub-zero refrigerator, La Cornue range, countertops that cost more than most people's cars. A temple to excess where I'd learned to cook elaborate meals for people who regarded me as an unfortunate necessity. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the space with the smell of Clayton's pretentious Brazilian blend. $60 a pound because regular coffee was apparently beneath the Blackwood palate. I made myself a cup of the instant coffee I kept hidden behind the organic quinoa, the one small rebellion I'd allowed myself. Tasted like reality, bitter but honest. Clayton emerged 20 minutes later, fully dressed in his armor of expensive wool and entitlement. I handed him his coffee in his monogrammed travel mug, watched him check his watch. The Patek Philippe Mason had given him when he made partner, worth more than most people's annual salaries. "I might be late tonight," he said, not looking at me. "The merger details are complex." "Of course," I said. "I'll have dinner ready whenever you get home." He paused at the door, turned back to look at me. For just a moment something flickered across his face. Guilt maybe, or perhaps just annoyance that I was still there, still playing my part when he'd already written me out of the script. "Madison?" "Yes." He shook his head. "Nothing. Have a good day." The door closed behind him with the expensive quiet of precision engineering, leaving me alone in our $15 million cage. I stood there for a long moment holding my instant coffee, feeling the weight of what was coming. Then I walked to the window, looked out at the city 40 floors below, and raised my mug in a toast to the skyline. "Have a good day too, Clayton," I whispered. "Enjoy it while it lasts." The city below looked different from 40 floors up after you'd made a decision that would change everything. I stood at the window for another moment, watching Manhattan wake up, before turning back to the pristine kitchen that had never felt like mine. The confirmation emails were already arriving on my phone, each ping a small victory. Deutsche Bank Singapore. Transfer received. Credit Suisse. Account activated. Each notification made my hands steady rather than shake. Fear had transformed into something else entirely. Purpose. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts to a number I hadn't called in 2 years. Emma. My sister, who'd told me exactly what she thought of Clayton at our engagement party, who'd warned me about the Blackwood family's reputation, who'd been right about everything. She'd stopped talking to me after I'd chosen their money over her concerns. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I almost hung up. "Madison." Her voice was cautious, like she was speaking to a ghost. "Is this really you?" "Am I?" My voice caught. "How did you apologize for 2 years of silence? For choosing people who saw you as disposable over the sister who'd held your hair back through every heartbreak? Are you hurt?" The caution in her voice shifted immediately to concern. "Did something happen? I need your help." The words came out in a rush. I know I have no right to ask, I know I chose them over you, but Emma, I need you. I really need you. There was a pause that stretched across the miles between New York and Chicago. Then I heard her exhale, long and slow. I never liked that pompous ass anyway, Maddie. What do you need me to do? The relief nearly brought me to my knees. Maddie. She called me Maddie, the nickname from when we were kids sharing a bedroom in Queens, before Clayton, before the Blackwoods, before I'd lost myself in designer clothes and charity luncheons. I need a place to stay. Maybe soon. Maybe very soon. And I need you to not ask questions yet. Done. My spare room's yours. Hell, my whole apartment's yours if you need it. When? I don't know yet. Maybe a few weeks. I have to be careful about how I do this. Maddie. Emma's voice softened. Is he hurting you? Not physically. But Emma, they're planning to throw me away. I heard them discussing it. Mason and Clayton, they're going to divorce me and leave me with nothing. Those bastards. I knew it. I told you at Christmas that something was off. The way they looked at you like you were hired help. And Clayton's sister, that Victoria woman, she's poison in Prada. You were right about all of it. I moved to the living room, sinking into the couch that cost more than most people's cars. I should have listened. Hey, no. Don't do that. You loved him. You wanted to believe in the fairy tale. We all do sometimes. She paused. But Maddie, if you're leaving, you need to be smart about it. The Blackwoods have money and lawyers, Anne. I know. I'm being careful. I've been planning. Good. That's my girl. The Maddie I grew up with, the one who kept 3 part-time jobs while getting her degree. She's still in there. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of the penthouse, feeling less alone than I had in years. Emma hadn't hesitated. Despite everything, despite my choosing Clayton's world over our relationship, she'd simply asked what I needed. That was family. Real family. I changed into jeans and a sweater, clothes from before Clayton started buying my wardrobe, and headed out. The doorman nodded politely, probably noting the time for whatever report he gave to Mason about my comings and goings. Let him. Today's activities would seem perfectly innocent. The subway to Queens felt like traveling back in time. Each stop took me further from the Blackwood universe of drivers and valet parking, closer to the world I'd grown up in. The diner on Northern Boulevard hadn't changed. Same cracked vinyl booths, same coffee that could strip paint, same comfort and anonymity. Rachel was already there, tucked into a corner booth, wearing a government employee's uniform of sensible suit and minimal jewelry. We'd been roommates our senior year at CUNY, both scholarship kids working multiple jobs, both determined to be more than our zip codes predicted. She'd gone into accounting, then government work. I'd gone into nonprofit work, then married Clayton. Madison. She stood to hug me and I smelled the same vanilla perfume she'd worn in college. You look like hell. Like you're about to do something dangerous. She slid back into the booth, studied my face. What's going on? I pulled out a flash drive, small and innocent looking, and placed it between us next to the salt shaker. Rachel's eyes tracked the movement, understanding immediately this wasn't a social visit. I need you to look at something. Unofficially. As a friend, not as someone who works for the IRS. Madison. Please. Just look. Then decide what you want to do with it. She pocketed the drive and we ordered breakfast. Eggs over easy, wheat toast, coffee that hadn't seen the inside of a $60 per pound bag. Tasted like home, like reality, like the life I'd walked away from. How bad is it? Rachel asked quietly. 12 million in tax fraud. Maybe more. Shell companies, offshore accounts, money laundering through art purchases. I kept my voice low, steady. All documented. Rachel's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Madison, this could destroy them. I know. Why now? What changed? They're planning to destroy me first. I'm just returning the favor. We ate in silence after that, 2 women from Queens who'd taken different paths, both understanding that some bridges, once burned, lit the way forward. After breakfast, I took another subway ride, this time to St. Michael's Cemetery in Astoria. My mother's grave was in the older section, a modest headstone that read, Helen Harper, beloved mother, never forgotten. I'd wanted to add more, to buy something grander once I had Blackwood money, but Clayton had called it excessive for someone of her station. I'd never forgiven him for that, though I'd smiled and agreed at the time. I knelt on the grass, not caring about the designer jeans, and talked to her the way I had when she was alive, when I could tell her anything. I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared I'm becoming like them. Moving money in the shadows, planning revenge, documenting their crimes to use against them. This isn't who you raised me to be. The wind picked up, rustling through the old oak trees, and I could almost hear her voice, practical and warm. I raised you to survive, Madison. To be smart. To protect yourself. I married him because I loved him. I thought he loved me too. But even as I said it, I remembered my mother's words after my father left, leaving us with nothing but debt and broken promises. Never depend on a man for your worth, Madison. The only power that matters is the power you create yourself. She'd been right then. He was right now. I left the cemetery with dirt on my knees and my mother's strength in my spine. The subway ride back to Manhattan gave me time to think, to plan the next moves in this chess game where the Blackwoods didn't even know I was playing. My phone buzzed with a text from my hairdresser, Sophia, of all people. Found that person we discussed. She's willing to meet. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., her office on 57th. 3 weeks ago, during a color touch-up, I'd carefully mentioned needing a good lawyer, someone who understood complex divorces. Sophia's hands had paused in my hair for just a moment before she'd said, "My cousin's friend went through something ugly with her Wall Street husband. The lawyer she used was brilliant. Discreet too." I'd memorized the name she'd whispered. Diane Lawson. Diane's office occupied the 20th floor of a building that whispered old money without screaming it. No chrome and glass like the corporate law firms Clayton used, just worn leather and dark wood that suggested decades of secrets safely kept. Diane herself was 60-something, silver hair pulled back severely, wearing a suit that probably cost a month of my old nonprofit salary but looked like she'd owned it forever. "Madison Blackwood," she said, standing to shake my hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze direct. Sophia's cousin filled me in on the basics. Wealthy husband, prenuptial agreement, potential complications. "That's the simplified version," I said, settling into a chair that had probably heard 1,000 stories of marriages imploding. "It always is." She pulled out a legal pad, clicked her pen. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. In my experience, the details that seem unimportant are often the ones that matter most." I talked for an hour, laying out the whole sordid story. The overheard conversation, the shell companies, the documentation I'd been gathering. Her pen never stopped moving, but her expression remained neutral until I pulled out a folder containing copies of everything I'd found. She reviewed the documents in silence for 20 minutes while I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, wondering if I was crazy, if I was overreacting, if maybe I should just accept the divorce and walk away with whatever crumbs they offered. Then Diane whistled, low and impressed. "Mason Blackwood's been running a $12 million fraud scheme, and you've got him dead to rights. This isn't just divorce leverage, Madison. This is federal crime territory." "I know. No, I don't think you fully understand. This documentation, properly presented, could result in criminal prosecution. Prison time. Complete financial destruction." She set down the papers, studied me over her reading glasses. "The question is, what do you want? Justice? Revenge? Financial security? Because how we proceed depends entirely on your end goal." "I want to not be thrown away like garbage," I said, the words coming out harsher than intended. "I want them to understand that I'm not some helpless trophy wife they can discard when convenient." "Then we need more. What you have is good, excellent even. But if we're going nuclear, we need everything." That night, while Clayton attended another late merger meeting, I sat on our bedroom floor with his laptop. He'd been careless lately, leaving it open, logged in like I was too stupid to understand what I might find. It took me 3 hours and 4 YouTube tutorials to figure out how to recover deleted emails, but when I did, the results made my blood run cold. There it was, dated 2 weeks ago, from Clayton to Victoria. Phase 2 initiated. Marcus situation being arranged. Documentation will be ready by month end. Marcus. My former personal trainer. A sweet kid from Brooklyn who'd helped me get in shape for last year's charity gala. Clayton had insisted I stop seeing him 6 months ago, claiming we couldn't afford it, which was laughable considering he'd spent $30,000 on a watch the same week. The email thread went deeper. Victoria had responded with contact information for a private investigator who specialized in creating narratives for difficult divorces. They were planning to manufacture an affair, complete with doctored photographs and false witness statements. The cruel efficiency of it took my breath away. I screenshotted everything, saved it to 3 different drives, uploaded it to a secure cloud account Diane had set up for me. My hands shook as I worked, not from fear but from rage. They weren't just planning to divorce me. They were planning to destroy my reputation, to make me the villain in their story. 2 days later, I was buying coffee at the place near Clayton's office when someone said my name. I turned to find Janet, Clayton's secretary, standing behind me looking nervous but determined. "Mrs. Blackwood, we need to talk." "Not here." "The park across the street, 5 minutes." She left before I could respond. I found her on a bench near the fountain, a manila folder clutched in her hands like a life preserver. "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to take down Mason Blackwood," she said without preamble. "He destroyed my father's company in '03. Hostile takeover disguised as a merger. My father died of a heart attack 6 months later, broken. He handed me the folder. Inside were ledgers, real ones, not the sanitized versions presented to shareholders. The scope of the fraud was staggering, reaching back 2 decades. "These are the real books, not the ones they show the board. I've been collecting evidence for years, waiting for the right moment, the right person." She looked at me directly. "You're going to destroy them, aren't you?" "Yes." "Good. There's more where this came from. Email me at this address." She handed me a card with only a Gmail address. "And I'll send you everything. They think I'm invisible, just furniture that answers phones and makes coffee. They have no idea what I've seen, what I know." She left as quickly as she'd appeared, leaving me holding enough evidence to bury the Blackwood empire twice over. I sat there, feeling the weight of the folder, the weight of Janet's 20 years of patient revenge, the weight of my own transformation from victim to warrior. That night, I stood at our bedroom window at dawn, watching the city wake up while Clayton slept off whatever he'd been doing until 3 a.m. The skyline was painted in shades of pink and gold, beautiful and cold as the life I'd built here. On the dresser behind me lay the birthday card I'd given Clayton last year. I'd found it while looking for documentation, tucked into his desk drawer with old receipts and business cards. "To many more years together," I'd written in my careful script. "All my love, Madison." I picked up the card, read my own words and realized the truth. I'd written my own prison sentence, signed it with love and handed it to my warden with a smile. But every prison had its weakness, every warden his blind spot. And I'd found theirs. I tucked the birthday card into my pocket and went to make breakfast, listening to Clayton stir in bed behind me. The past week had changed him in ways that made the hair on my neck stand up. He'd become watchful, careful, like an animal that sensed a trap but couldn't see it. His questions had shifted from dismissive to probing, and I could feel his eyes following me around the penthouse even when his face was turned away. "Where were you yesterday afternoon?" he asked that morning, appearing in the kitchen doorway still in his pajama pants. The casualness in his voice was forced, painted on like bad makeup. "The library. Book club, remember? We're reading that new romance novel everyone's talking about." I cracked eggs into a pan, keeping my movements relaxed and normal. Susan Bradford brought homemade cookies. Too sweet for my taste, but I pretended to love them. He moved closer and I could smell last night's whiskey on his breath. "Which library?" "The branch on 67th. Why the sudden interest in my book club?" "Just wondering." He picked up my phone from the counter, turned it over in his hands. "You've been going out a lot lately." "Same schedule as always, Clayton. Tuesdays for book club, Thursdays for yoga, Saturday mornings for the farmer's market." I slid the eggs onto his plate, adding the toast points he liked. "Although I did skip yoga last week. Wasn't feeling up to it." He set my phone down, but not before I saw him check if it was locked. It was. It always was now, with a password he'd never guess. My mother's birthday backwards. I'd noticed the man following me 3 days ago. Gray sedan, different drivers but same car, always half a block behind. Clayton's investigator was competent but not invisible. I'd started using their presence to my advantage, leading them to the most boring, innocent places imaginable. The library where I actually did sit with romance novels for hours. The yarn shop where I pretended to consider taking up knitting. The church where I attended grief counseling for losing my mother. That one was even true. What the investigator missed were the real meetings. The bathroom breaks where I made calls from a burner phone. The coffee shop conversations that looked like chance encounters but were carefully orchestrated. The flash drives hidden in library books that Rachel would retrieve hours later. My phone buzzed with a text. Victoria. Free for lunch today? Lou Bernardine at 1. I showed Clayton the message. Your sister wants to have lunch. Since when does Victoria want to spend time with me? Something flickered across his face too quickly to read. You should go. It would be good for you two to get closer. Lou Bernardine was exactly the kind of place Victoria would choose. Intimidatingly expensive, requiring reservations months in advance unless your last name opened doors. She was already seated when I arrived, wearing a cream suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair twisted into a chignon that looked effortless but had likely taken her stylist an hour to achieve. Madison, darling, she stood to kiss my cheeks, a gesture we'd never done before. You look wonderful. Is that new? I was wearing a 2-year-old dress from Nordstrom Rack, but I smiled and thanked her. The waiter appeared immediately and Victoria ordered for both of us without asking my preference. Another power move dressed up as generosity. I feel like we've never really gotten to know each other, she said, unfolding her napkin with precise movements. 7 years and we're practically strangers. That's my fault, really. I can be protective of Clayton. He's lucky to have a sister who cares so much. Family is everything, don't you think? She sipped her water, studying me over the rim. Speaking of family, how is yours? Your sister Emma, isn't it? In Chicago. Warning bells rang in my head. Victoria had never shown interest in my family before, had actively avoided any discussion of my working-class background. She's well. Busy with her bakery. How nice. Small businesses are so brave. Such a risk though, especially in this economy. He paused, letting that sink in. I do hope she's being careful with her finances. The IRS can be so unforgiving about bookkeeping errors. I kept my face neutral while my phone recorded every word from my purse. Emma's very careful. She learned from our mother about keeping proper records. Of course. Still, it would be tragic if someone were to, say, misinterpret certain financial documents. The authorities can be so quick to assume the worst. Victoria smiled, all teeth and no warmth. But I'm sure that won't be a problem. Not as long as everyone stays in their proper lanes. The threat was crystal clear. Back off or we'll go after Emma. I wanted to throw my water in her perfectly made-up face, but instead I smiled back. I've always believed in staying where I belong, Victoria. Some of us know our place. I'm so glad we understand each other. The rest of lunch was a dance of veiled threats and false pleasantries. Victoria mentioned how devastating fraud accusations could be for small business owners, how careful one had to be with financial documentation, how misunderstandings could destroy entire families. Each word was chosen deliberately, each pause calculated for maximum impact. The next morning, Diane called with the name of another attorney. James Morrison. Old money family, but he's the black sheep. Hates everything his class represents. He'll see you today at 4. James Morrison's office occupied a corner suite overlooking Central Park. Unlike the corporate sterility of Clayton's world, this space felt lived in. Books stacked on every surface, coffee stains on the desk, a basketball hoop mounted on the back of the door. James himself was mid-40s, salt and pepper beard, wearing a suit that probably cost a fortune but looked like he'd slept in it. Diane sent me your files, he said without preamble. Spent all night reading them. Haven't been this excited about a case since I helped take down that senator for embezzlement. He spread the documents across his desk, pointing to specific sections. The prenup is airtight regarding family trusts, but here's the beautiful thing. It says nothing about whistleblower rewards. You report this fraud, provide the documentation, and you're entitled to 10 to 30% of whatever the government recovers. Given what you've shown me, we're looking at millions. Completely separate from any divorce settlement. And they can't touch it? Not a cent. It's not marital property, not a family asset. It's a government reward for civic duty. He actually laughed, a genuine sound of delight. They wrote that prenup to protect themselves, never imagining you'd find another way. Classic Blackwood arrogance. That night, Clayton came home with roses. Not just any roses, the expensive kind from the shop on Fifth Avenue, the ones he'd brought when he was courting me. He was trying so hard to seem normal that it was almost painful to watch. For you, Clayton said, holding out the roses like a peace offering or maybe a test. I thought we could have dinner together tonight. Just us. Like we used to. I took the flowers, their perfume heavy and cloying in the apartment air. That sounds nice. Should I cook something special? Actually, I thought we'd order in. That Thai place you love. He moved closer, touched my cheek with fingertips that felt like they were checking my temperature. Madison, I know I've been distant lately. The merger, the stress. But after this week everything will be different. I promise. Different. Yes, it certainly would be. I'd like that, I said, leaning into his touch just enough to seem genuine. It's been too long since we really talked. He smiled, and for a second I glimpsed the man who'd proposed in my queen's apartment, who'd promised to love me for who I was. Then his phone buzzed and the mask slipped back into place. I need to handle this. Order whatever you want for dinner. We'll eat at 8. After he disappeared into his office, I stood there holding $50 roses and feeling the weight of what was coming. 3 days from now I would destroy everything the Blackwood family had built. But first I had one more performance to give. I spent the next 2 days playing the perfect wife with an intensity that should have won awards. I ironed Clayton's shirts with extra care, made his favorite breakfast each morning, even attended Susan's charity committee meeting where I smiled through 2 hours of discussions about flower arrangements for a gala I'd never attend. Every normal gesture was a goodbye they didn't know they were receiving. On Thursday morning I sent the invitation. A simple text to Clayton, "Can we meet for lunch today? Mason should come too. There's something important we need to discuss about the family finances." 1 p.m. at his club. Clayton called immediately. "What's this about, Madison? I found some documents while organizing your office. I think there might be a problem with some of the tax filings. I'd rather discuss it in person." There was a long pause. "We'll be there." I chose the red dress deliberately. The one Clayton had bought me for our anniversary 2 years ago, then told me made me look like I was trying too hard to fit in with his world. The one I'd worn to a company dinner where Victoria had spent the evening making subtle jokes about new money, while I smiled and pretended not to understand. Today, trying too hard was exactly the message I wanted to send. Let them think I was desperate, overreaching, about to embarrass myself with some pathetic attempt at negotiation. Mason's private club occupied a limestone building that had been excluding people like me for over a century. Dark wood, leather chairs, portraits of dead white men who'd built fortunes on the backs of others. The mayor recognized me with the kind of disdain reserved for unwelcome obligations. "Mrs. Blackwood, your party is already seated in the private dining room." They were both there when I walked in. Mason at the head of the table because he had to dominate every space he entered. Clayton to his right like the dutiful son he'd always been. The champagne was already open, 2 glasses poured, a third sitting empty at the place they'd designated for me. "Madison," Mason said, not standing, not offering any greeting beyond my name spoken like an inconvenience. "Clayton says you found something concerning?" I sat down, placed my purse carefully beside me and pulled out a manila folder. "I did. Though I think concerning might be an understatement." Mason actually smiled. "My dear, I appreciate your interest in the family business, but perhaps these matters are better left to those who understand them." "You mean like understanding how to funnel $12 million through offshore accounts?" I slid the folder across the white tablecloth. "Or understanding how to create shell companies in Malta and Cyprus? Or maybe understanding how to launder money through inflated art purchases?" Mason's hand hesitated over the folder. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. He opened it slowly like it might contain something poisonous. In a way it did. His face went through a transformation that was almost beautiful in its completeness. Smug confidence to confusion to understanding to rage, each emotion painted clearly across features that had probably never shown such honest expression. The champagne glass in his other hand started to tremble. "What is this?" His voice came out as a croak, nothing like the commanding tone he'd used moments before. "It's reality, Mason. Every offshore account, every falsified valuation, every bribe disguised as a consulting fee. 7 years of federal crimes, all documented, all verified, all with your signature." Clayton grabbed the folder from his father, his face draining of color as he flipped through the pages. "Madison, what have you done?" "I've done what you trained me to do. I've paid attention. All those years of being invisible, of being furniture in your conversations, of handling your secretary work, because you couldn't be bothered. I learned everything. This is. Clayton's hands were shaking now, papers rustling with his tremors. These are private documents. You had no right. Actually, I had every right. Half of these companies are in my name, remember? You put them there to hide your crimes. Every consulting fee you paid me to keep quiet about the irregularities I found? I kept those receipts. Every document you had me sign without reading? I made copies. Mason's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. You little. Careful, Mason. We wouldn't want to add assault charges to your federal indictment. We can talk about this, Clayton said, reaching across the table like he wanted to take my hand but couldn't quite bring himself to touch me. Madison, please. We loved each other once. I stood up, smoothing the red dress they'd always said tried too hard. You loved having someone you could control. Someone grateful. Someone who wouldn't ask questions. And I loved the man I thought you were. The one who proposed in my queen's apartment. The one who said he loved me for exactly who I was. I picked up my purse, keeping my voice steady. We were both wrong. This is blackmail, Mason sputtered, finally finding his voice again. We'll fight this. Our lawyers. Your lawyers will be busy. The originals are already filed with the SEC, the IRS, and the FBI. They're probably executing search warrants on your offices right now. I walked toward the door, each step measured and deliberate. Behind me, I heard the crash of Mason's champagne glass hitting the table, Clayton's voice calling my name with increasing desperation. As I reached for the door handle, Mason's voice rose to a roar. You've destroyed everything. 3 generations of theft, I said without turning around. And one woman who finally said enough. I opened those mahogany doors and walked through them, past the portraits of dead men who'd built empires on lies, past the Mayor D, who looked at me with something that might have been respect, out into the afternoon sunlight that felt like freedom. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face as I stood on the sidewalk outside Mason's club, breathing in air that tasted like victory and terror combined. My phone was already buzzing. 17 missed calls from Clayton, 4 from Victoria, 1 from Susan. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to where James Morrison was waiting in his BMW, engine running. How did it go? He asked as I slid into the passenger seat. About as well as expected. Mason turned purple. Clayton begged. I walked out. Good. The papers will be delivered to Clayton within the hour. Given what's coming, he'll sign anything to avoid prison. James pulled into traffic, his expression satisfied. The FBI executed search warrants 20 minutes ago. Blackwood Industries, their home offices, even Mason's country club locker. It's over for them. The divorce papers James had prepared were works of art in their simplicity. Everything mine stayed mine. Everything questionable became evidence. Clayton would walk away with his personal belongings and whatever the federal government didn't seize. The prenup that had protected the Blackwood fortune became irrelevant when that fortune was built on crime. Clayton signed them all that same evening. James met with Clayton's lawyer, Thomas Brennan, in a Starbucks of all places. According to James, Thomas's hands shook as he reviewed the documents, whispering constantly about damage control and minimizing exposure. Your client needs to sign these tonight, James had said. Tomorrow the offers might not be as generous. This is extortion, Thomas had protested weakly. This is mercy. Your client is looking at conspiracy charges. My client is offering him a clean divorce instead of naming him as co-conspirator in her testimony. The papers came back signed within 2 hours. Clayton's signature was shaky, nothing like the confident scrawl he'd used on our marriage certificate. Next to mine, it looked like a child's first attempt at cursive. For 6 weeks I lived in a strange limbo. The penthouse was mine until the federal asset seizure went through. I packed methodically, taking only what had been mine before the marriage and what I'd bought with my own money. The rest, the art, the furniture, the ridiculous kitchen appliances, would go to auction to pay restitution to the victims of Mason's schemes. Emma flew in from Chicago to help me pack. She stood in the master bedroom, holding up designer dresses with price tags that made her whistle. You're not keeping any of these? They're not mine. They're costumes for a character I don't play anymore. What about this? She held up a simple black dress, one I'd bought myself from a department store sale. That one comes with me. We were folding clothes when Emma's phone buzzed. Oh my God, Maddie. You need to see this. The video was shaky, obviously filmed on someone's phone. Mason Blackwood being led out of his country club in handcuffs, FBI agents on either side. His golf partners, men he'd known for decades, scattered like startled pigeons. Someone had perfectly captured the moment his face shifted from indignation to disbelief. That instant when he realized his money and connections meant nothing anymore. The audio was even better. Victoria's voice, shrill and panicked. This is a conspiracy. You don't know who you're dealing with. The Blackwood name means something in this city. Security guards escorted her away as she continued screaming about frame jobs and jealous wives. The video had 3 million views by evening. You did that, Emma said softly. You brought down Mason Blackwood. I just told the truth. Same thing in his world. The investigation that followed was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Each document I'd provided led investigators to 3 more crimes. Each crime led to more conspirators. The Brazilian subsidiaries weren't just tax shelters. They were washing money for human traffickers. The art purchases weren't just money laundering. They were bribes to judges for favorable zoning decisions. The shell companies had funded a senator's entire campaign illegally. My evidence had been the key that opened a door to a room full of crimes I'd never imagined. Federal investigators called me back 6 times for additional testimony. Each time they looked at me with something between gratitude and amazement. You documented everything, Agent Sarachin said during one session. Most whistleblowers give us fragments. You gave us a roadmap. I had a good teacher, I replied. Mason himself. He just didn't know he was teaching me. 3 months into the investigation, my phone rang at 2 a.m. Clayton. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Madison. His voice was rough, like he'd been drinking. Please. I need you to recant your testimony. Clayton, you signed the divorce papers. We're done. I'll give you anything. Money. I still have some hidden accounts Mason doesn't know about. The house in the Hamptons, it's in my mother's maiden name. We could try again. Clayton. I loved you. The words exploded out of him. I did in my own way. You have to believe that. Your way of loving included planning to leave me with nothing. That was Mason's idea. All of it. The divorce, the setup with Marcus, everything. I was going to fight him on it, I swear. I sat in my empty bedroom surrounded by packed boxes and felt nothing but tired. No, you weren't. You vindictive. He caught himself, then the dam burst. You destroyed everything. 3 generations of building and you tore it down out of spite. You never deserved the Blackwood name. You were nothing before us and you'll be nothing after. There was the real Clayton, the one who'd been hiding under the charm and the expensive suits. The poison Mason had planted in him had roots so deep they'd become part of his DNA. You're right, I said calmly. I never deserved the Blackwood name. I deserved better. I hung up and blocked his number. Then I sat in the darkness of what used to be our bedroom and felt the strange peace that comes from hearing someone finally tell you exactly who they are. The trial would start in 2 months. Mason faced 47 federal charges. Victoria was named as co-conspirator in 12 of them. Clayton had avoided prosecution by millimeters, saved only by his ignorance of the deeper crimes. But ignorance and innocence weren't the same thing, and everyone knew it. The Blackwood Empire hadn't just fallen. It had been excavated, examined, and exposed for the criminal enterprise it had always been. And I had been the one holding the shovel. The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain when the verdict came down. I wasn't there. My lawyer advised against it, said my presence might turn into a media circus. So I watched from my new apartment in Brooklyn, a 2-bedroom walk-up that cost less per month than Clayton used to spend on wine. The CNN reporter stood where I'd walked months earlier, her voice carrying across my small living room. Mason Blackwood, once one of Manhattan's most powerful businessmen, was sentenced today to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. His son Clayton received 3 years supervised release for his peripheral involvement. The judge called it one of the most extensive corporate fraud schemes in recent history. The numbers scrolled across the bottom of the screen. 20 million in fines. Complete dissolution of Blackwood Industries. Assets seized totaling 47 million. Every property, every account, Every piece of art they'd bought with stolen money, gone. I turned off the television and made myself instant coffee in my simple kitchen with its dated appliances and chipped countertops. Tasted like freedom. The whistleblower reward came through 2 weeks later. $3 million deposited into an account that no Blackwood lawyer could touch. Clean money for the first time in 7 years. James Morrison called to confirm the transfer, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. It's yours free and clear. What are you planning to do with it? I'd been thinking about that question since the day I filed the reports. Build something better. The foundation came together faster than I'd expected. Harper's House, a resource center for women trapped in financial abuse. Not just wives of wealthy men, but women whose partners controlled them through money, through debt, through economic manipulation dressed up as love. I'd learned that prison bars came in many forms, and the golden ones were sometimes the hardest to escape. Jenna was my first hire. She'd sent me a card after Mason's sentencing that simply said, "Thank you for doing what I couldn't." When I called to offer her a position as the foundation's administrative director, she cried for 5 minutes before accepting. 20 years I waited, she said during our first day setting up the office. 20 years of watching him destroy people. You did in months what I dreamed of doing for decades. We did it, I corrected. Your documentation made the difference. Emma visited from Chicago once the foundation was running. Her bakery was thriving now, expanded with a loan I'd guaranteed. She brought a box of pastries for the office, the same ones she used to make in our mother's kitchen when we were teenagers dreaming of bigger lives. You know what Mom would say about all this? Emma asked, standing in my office with its second-hand furniture and donated computers. That power you create yourself is the only power that matters? That, and she'd probably wonder why you're still using instant coffee when you can afford the good stuff. We laughed and it felt like healing. 6 months after the verdict, on a gray Tuesday that felt like any other, Susan Blackwood appeared at my door. I recognized her through the peephole but almost didn't believe it. She looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced with a simple cardigan and slacks, her perfect hair showing gray roots. "Madison," she said when I opened the door. "I know I have no right to be here." She stood in my doorway like a ghost of the life I'd left behind, and I had every right to close the door in her face. Instead I stepped aside. "Would you like some tea?" She sat on my second-hand couch, holding the mug like it might shatter, and looked around my modest apartment with something that might have been envy. "It's peaceful here." "It's mine." "Yes." She set down the tea, folded her hands in her lap the way she always did when she had something difficult to say. "I knew what they were planning, Madison. The divorce, the setup, all of it. I should have warned you." "Why didn't you?" "I was afraid." The words came out small, almost whispered. 40 years of being Mrs. Mason Blackwood. I didn't know how to be anything else. The money, the status, the cage, it was all I had. She looked up at me then, and I saw tears in eyes that had always been perfectly composed. "I was a prisoner too, just in a prettier cell. You could have left." "With what?" "Mason controlled everything. Every account, every asset, every relationship. I watched him destroy anyone who crossed him. I thought if I stayed quiet, stayed perfect, I'd be safe." She laughed bitterly. "Now I'm 70 years old, living in my sister's guest room in New Jersey, and my husband will die in prison. So much for safety." I poured her more tea, this woman who'd watched my humiliation for 7 years and never said a kind word. But I understood her now in a way I couldn't before. We'd both been trapped by the Blackwood name, just in different ways. "The foundation helps women in financial abuse situations," I said. "All women. Even ones who were complicit in their own cages." Susan's hand shook as she reached for the tea. "I don't deserve your help." "No," I agreed. "But you need it. That's enough." She left an hour later with information about our services, resources for starting over at 70, and something she'd probably never had before: hope that life after the Blackwoods was possible. That night, 9 months after I'd overheard my own funeral being planned, I stood at my Brooklyn window with a glass of champagne. Not the overpriced stuff Mason used to serve, but a good bottle I'd chosen myself. The city spread out below, smaller from 3 floors up than from 40, but more real somehow. I raised the glass to my reflection in the window. Not to Madison Blackwood, the woman they'd tried to erase, but to Madison Harper. The girl from Queens who'd worked 3 jobs through college. The woman who documented crimes while playing the perfect wife. The survivor who'd brought down an empire not with anger or violence, but with patience, preparation, and truth. The Blackwoods had thought they were planning my execution that night in their penthouse. Instead, they'd been writing their own ending. They'd handed me the weapons, taught me the strategies, and never imagined I was learning their game better than they played it themselves. If this story of calculated revenge kept you hooked until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Madison slid that evidence folder across the white tablecloth, watching Mason's face transform from smugness to pure panic. What was your most satisfying moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.